All right, in this episode, we are covering our fourth domain, which is the Great Commission, advancing the gospel. The purpose of engaging with domain 4 is to focus our attention on eternity, to open our eyes to the greater narrative of God's story.
I think that domain 3 and domain 4 actually pair together really well. When I think of domain 3, I think of taking a defensive stand against suffering and oppression in the world, right? God did not design the world to be filled with brokenness and destruction, but that is the reality of the world that we live in today since the fall. And domain 3 pushes back against that as we wait for the world to be renewed and restored again. And it's a very active process, that pushing back against this kind of ever looming suffering and destruction that is all around us. Domain 4, on the other hand, goes on the offensive, right? When I think of the Great Commission itself, it is a going out and taking the message of the gospel actively to all parts of the world in order to hasten that renewal and rebirth. It says in Matthew 24, verse 14, this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. The moment we are waiting for the full restoration of the world is precisely for the gospel to be taken to every nation, tribe, people, and language. And that's what domain 4 is all about.
When we involve ourselves in domain 4, it helps us see ourselves in the greatest story of all time that God has been writing since the beginning.
I think that's one of the most powerful parts about domain 4 in terms of how it affects us as givers. When you look back through the Bible, and if you've ever done like a 1 year Bible plan or just in any length of time, committed to really reading the Bible cover to cover, to see the entire overarching story, it really changes how you view the whole thing. We start with the garden and the fall, right? God created a perfect universe to exist in perfect relationship with us. And that only lasts 2 chapters before everything falls apart. The whole rest of the story is God with this enormous, elaborate plan to bring us back to Him. He moves through Abraham and the patriarchs, who then move on to Egypt for 400 years in slavery, leading to Moses and the Exodus. After wandering through the desert for 40 years, God brings his people to the promised land and begins to raise up this nation through which he's going to redeem the whole world. We see the judges and then the prophets and then the kings, each successively revealing different aspects of how God relates to his people and how he is moving us back towards him in a slow but steady way, despite all of our attempts to pull away from him. And then as we move forward, Jesus literally splits history in half and completely changes the paradigm. After the Gospels, we move on to Acts, and we see the gospel just explode forth from Jerusalem to the Gentile cities across the Mediterranean. And it's actually not that long before Christianity becomes the official faith of the Roman Empire. From Rome, we see the gospel begin to go out to Northern Europe and the monastic missions across the world. We see the gospel move to the Americas and to Africa and to Asia. And then moving into the era that we see today, we begin to see a shift to a multi-centric movement of the gospel across the world, where the gospel is moving from everywhere to everywhere, multi-directionally across every continent. There's also a shift to a much greater emphasis on native missionaries bringing the gospel to neighboring communities and less reliance on the West bringing the gospel to every unengaged people group. This story is one continuous narrative that God has been writing since those first pages in Genesis. And if you look at the time scale of that story, we are in the final couple pages of what God is writing. And the stuff that we are seeing today in the missions world is unlike anything we have seen since the days of Acts.
And generosity in our giving gives us a powerful way to step into and engage ourselves in this chapter of the story that we're living in today. Now, we've heard several times on the Finish Line podcast that top missions leaders believe that Christians already possess all the resources needed to complete the Great Commission in this generation. We see massive acceleration in Bible translation, church planting, discipleship movements, unprecedented collaboration that's leading to the spread of the gospel at rates we've never seen before.
Yeah, it's really an incredible time that we live in. There's a verse that stands out to me to describe this moment in history, which is from Romans 13, verses 11 and 12. And it says, "The hour has already come for you to wake up from your slumber, because our salvation is nearer now than when we first believed. The night is nearly over, the day is almost here." God is moving in incredible ways right now, but it is easy for us to miss if we're not paying attention, watching for how he's moving. And that's what I think this verse gets at here, and has been a wake up call to me as I think about going about my daily life, my job, family, and stuff. It's easy for us to be unaware of what God is doing, especially because some of the most significant movement is happening outside of the Western world right now.
I'm reminded of Numbers chapter 13 and 14, where we see Israel standing at the edge of the promised land, ready to enter into the inheritance that God has promised them. And their spies come back with their report, and they saw giants in the land and great armies. And the people were afraid, and they refused to trust God. So God let them wander, waiting for a generation that would trust him and obey his call. We know that God is going to get the job done in his perfect timing. The question is whether our generation will be the one to answer the call. And I feel like that's where we are right now. If we don't accept the invitation, God will wait for a generation that will.
Now, just like our other three domains, there's a natural growth progression in terms of how engaging in domain four shapes us as givers and as believers. In the beginning is what we call disconnect. No sense of eternity, complete focus on our personal stories. I can picture the season of life that this was for me. What job am I going to have? What career path am I going to take? Who am I going to marry? These kind of things. All important and good questions, and nothing wrong with those questions. But when I look back to that season, I can easily see that everything I was focused on was about, what am I going to do next? What is going to happen to me? What should I be doing? And I was totally unaware of this bigger story that was going on all around me and that had been going on for thousands of years. Eventually, we progress to the second stage, awakening. And this is simply recognizing that your life extends beyond this world, right? For many of us, that's soon after we come to faith. But sometimes it takes a lot longer than that for that truth to really sink in. But that's an important moment because it begins to change how we interact with our time on this earth when we see that that time has ripple effects through eternity. Our third stage is what we call concern, and that is a growing burden for the eternal destiny of those closest to us, right? As we come to accept and understand that our life and our decisions have eternal consequences, that should naturally begin to affect how we interact with and love those nearest to us. And as we have been invited into relationship with the creator of the universe, that it would naturally produce in us a desire for others to experience that same depth of relationship that can totally transform their lives.
From there, we move to our fourth phase, which is compassion. And this is really moving from what you just described of having concern for the people closest to us to having that same heart for the salvation of all people. And then we move from compassion to alignment. This is a stage where your life begins to look different from somebody who does not prioritize eternal matters. You're spending your time and your resources differently, and you're making your decisions in light of this bigger story. And finally, we move to our sixth and final stage, which is immersion. This is fully seeing yourself as a participant in God's grand redemptive story and letting eternity guide every decision that you make in life.
Yeah, I think that last one is really profound. You know, in these early stages, I think about hearing a sermon about the importance of sharing the gospel and how transformative it is, and gearing yourself up, thinking, "Yeah, I'm going to do this week." It's like an action that you're going to take. And as you move on to these later stages, it's really more of an inseparable kind of purpose and mission and story. It's like the reason God has let us remain here rather than just bringing us home so that we can introduce others to this relationship that has completely transformed every part of our lives. And seeing every part of what we do, our family, our work, our activities, where we're placed in our neighborhood, all of this as ways that God is using us in this greater story. And that's where we see this immersion phase where it all starts to come together in an inseparable way.
In our next episode, we're going to take all these things we've covered talking about the four domains and we're going to tie it all together. Stay tuned.